Welcome Wargamers to a video that I am so excited for, and you'll see why in just a bit. Today we're diving into one of the smallest factions in Age of Sigmar, but vitally important of a character type to use in Soulbound, the Age of Sigmar role-playing game by Cubicle 7. I'm of course talking about the Devoted of Sigmar. Now I want to say up front here, there's very little lore and art for this faction. As they were absorbed into the greater, cities of Sigmar army, their model range was reduced to a single kit, sadly. But I love this faction, it speaks to me on a lot of levels, so let's get into it. So who are the Devoted of Sigmar from like a 40,000 foot view? This is the established church that has developed around the worship and preaching of Sigmar himself. And for the longest time, we only saw one shade of it, right? The flagellant. Fanatics that prayed feverishly before hurling themselves into slaughter to prove their devotion. These were the endless masses of mad worshippers that formed the bulk of the church, at least from a gaming perspective, right? They were, what we got to interact with the church. But with the release of Soulbound, we learned that there was actually a lot more going on with the Devoted of Sigmar, the church in general, and the nature of worship of the gods. Not every member of the Devoted of Sigmar is this fanatic who throws their bodies at the enemy like a meat shield. That actually accounts for a very small portion of the overall organization. I'm going to do a full video about worship and the gods and how they interact with mortals, but put simply, the gods of the Pantheon need people who worship them. It allows them to spread their influence and power all over the realms. The more a god is worshipped, the more power they can attain and therefore instill wherever they want it to be. To this end, the role of the church is to spread the worship of Sigmar, consecrating every place in the realms so that his light may shine upon it. This is done a few ways. Missionaries go out and preach to far-out villages. Clerics and bureaucrats make sure the day-to-day practical needs are met for congregants and the church organization. And yes, of course, flagellants hurl themselves at the enemy, hoping to bring Sigmar's light to the darkness of the battlefield. One kind of extreme instance of this that I love was a small excerpt, and I believe it was in the core book. It depicts the Devoted of Sigmar walking across lands that were previously corrupted by chaos, and they'd cut and bleed themselves all over the earth. The act made it possible to heal the land from corruption that it was under. The earth and nearby realm gate began to change back to a healthy oasis. Right? Sigmar had blessed this ground, and it was consecrated by his followers. Now, the Devoted of Sigmar existed long before the Age of Sigmar, like the time period, all the way back to the Age of Myth, where gods walked more freely amongst mortals. There were people who utterly worshipped Sigmar, and it made sense, right? He was the chief human god, the one who brought civilization to so many different tribes and species. In fact, Sigmar reunited Dwarden and elves to their respective gods, and so many people of all different races and creeds are at the very least thankful to Sigmar. So when the Age of Chaos came, many of them heard the gods' call and fled back to Azir. Not all Devoted of Sigmar did. Some chose to stay outside the gates, trying desperately to survive and in a way pass on the worship of their god to later generations, basically saying, we're not all going to make it. I choose to stay out so that I can, share the good word with everyone who else got locked out. But for those who made it to Azir, this was where the church became a true power base. Azirite culture and church are the same, right? Both are firm anchors of these traditional beliefs and bureaucracy and puts them into action. The seat of power for the church is within Azirheim. And I wish we had pictures of this place because I cannot fathom what Sigmar's own personal church in his capital city would be like. I think that would be so cool to see. The current leader of the Church of Sigmar, the Cult of Sigmar, whatever you want to call it, is led by Archpriestess Asvi Stormright. She is the ultimate authority in the entire church organization. Along with her are the Order of Azir, a collection of top-ranking clerics and masters said to answer to only Sigmar himself. But that's not really true because this is still a mortal creation. There's a lot of politicking here, just like any organization, so you still need to curry favor with other people to stay on top. And while there is a mainstream, in quotes, church, with its doctrine and practices, the worship of Sigmar is somewhat fluid in that there are many cults and offshoots, all that focus on different aspects of the God King. Right? Some may focus on his charity and protection, which might lead to more missionaries and financial support for villages and that kind of stuff, while others focus on his might and his fury, which of course would lend you to the battlefield aspects of it all. But there's an element of truth in all of these branches of the church, but they may largely act independent of the main church body. Now, the tasks and goals of the Devoted of Sigmar are as varied as its members, right? Some are tight-lipped scholars that seek to reclaim ancient holy sites, reconsecrating them in an effort to bring the vengeance of Sigmar to long-lost places of worship from the age of myth. Some are traveling preachers meant to be reassurance and blessings to the faithful abroad, somewhat like a bard, but specifically for, spiritual supplication. And of course, many are determined to see the twisting forces of chaos be driven out. Their zeal has been radicalized and driven to the extremes of self-punishment and complete disregard for self-preservation. And these, of course, are the ones we get to interact with on the table if you're playing Age of Sigmar. Though, of course, if you're playing Soulbound, you can create whatever kind of Devoted of Sigmar you want. Could be even more of like an Inquisitor type thing. You know what I mean? There's a lot of different flavors within this church because there are so many different things that it has its tendrils in. And realistically, that's about all the lore that we have for them. So let's talk, why is this cool? Why do I like the Devoted of Sigmar so much? First up, I'll admit my biases. I'm a sucker for religious fanatics as a setup for any army. I like it because it demonstrates extreme devotion to a singular thing, which is fantastic for narrative clarity, meaning you can always have a reason why these two forces are fighting if your army is all about a thing, right? A MacGuffin. But because there are so many cults and offshoots and isolated branches of the church, there's still tons of room for storytelling as you get into the nitty-gritty of it, right? The politicking, the prayer rites, and how the environment changes them, right? What aspects of the god do they worship? The same can be said for armies like Fire Slayers or Bone Splitters, things like that, where it's easy to put your thumb on, this is what they're about, Gorka Morka, Grimnir, Sigmar, respectively, but then there are so many shades of that's what gives you the narrative freedom. I like that Soulbound presents more of the church than just the crazed zealots, right? Traveling preachers, bureaucrats, etc. This is a massive range of personalities and characters, right? Some are crazy, for sure, but others are super pragmatic and caring, maybe even gentle. It's a side of the game we don't see often because it's not something that really works on the tabletop. But this is absolutely the faction I would be / will be playing when I play Soulbound with my friends. I just think it's the coolest thing. Truthfully, this could absolutely be its own faction, right? Immortal Army as a striking mirror to the Stormcast Eternals, who shed their blood to purify the realms. A sacrifice that's no less noble than the countless deaths that one of the God King's warriors has to endure, right? A flagellant hurling themselves out of devotion and a liberator who gets struck down 1,000 times again. The sacrifice is no different. They're both giving something up. Also a great way to learn more about Azir and life in the city. So if they did make it a battle tome, that could be a really interesting way to show off this is what the life is like in the main metropolitan areas, or also the small villages abroad as people travel to preach and that kind of thing. I just think that it's a subset of an army that is ripe for its own expansion and faction to break out of Cities of Sigmar, but also at the same time add a lot to the lore. It's not just about making models for model's sake. It will contribute and enrich Cities of Sigmar and the Age of Sigmar lore as a whole if it's really fleshed out, I guess you could say. In fact, sometimes I still boot up Mordheim, the City of the Damned, the video game, and I'll play as the Witch Hunters just because they use flagellants in there, because I just like them so much. I don't know, there's just something about them of just hurling themselves out there with just nothing but the most shoddy weaponry, and just their look is so grim and dark, and I just like it. So tell me your thoughts down below. What would you like to see from a Devoted of Sigmar army? And if you are playing the Soulbound role-playing game, what kind of Devoted of Sigmar are you playing as? Are you going to go with the flagellant, or are you going to develop something a little bit differently? There's no wrong answer. I love it all. So go ahead and leave me the comments down below and I'll read you there. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar video. Thank you so much and happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.